I'm Sandeep Rao. I'm an interventional radiologist at the Sierra Providence Health System in El Paso, Texas, and I'm going to be discussing the use of the Magellan Robotic System and my experiences regarding radiation exposure reduction. A brief overview of my experience. I've done a wide variety of embolization cases using the Magellan Robotic System in both the 6 and 9 French. However, I'm going to limit most of this discussion to my data that I've collected using the 6 French system for drug-eluting bead transarterial chemoembolization. This image demonstrates the robotic system, and these additional images demonstrate how that system is put into play in our fluoroscopy suite. As you can see, there's an independent workstation at the bed, at the foot of the bed, behind a independent leaded glass shield. Independent lead shield, and there's the robotic system at the foot of the bed. This next slide demonstrates the view that you would get from a traditional approach, where I would traditionally stand. You have the bedside control. If you wanted to use that, you have the independent workstation, the lead shield, and then the robotic system at the foot of the bed. So a lot of the data that I'm going to be discussing will come from this paper that I presented at the Society of Interventional Radiology meeting regarding initial evaluation of safety, feasibility, success, and outcomes using the Magellan system for transarterial chemoembolization for hepatocellular carcinoma. So in that study, what I did was I collected a variety of data regarding drug-eluting bead transarterial chemoembolization. I looked at the ability of the 6 French catheter to cannulate the superior mesenteric artery, the celiac axis, the common hepatic, and the right and left hepatic artery, and distal hepatic branches. I also looked at the need for additional microcatheters that might be needed. We also looked at the radiation exposure to participants in the case, specifically the operator, technologist, and additional support staff using the RaySafe I2 system. For those of you not familiar with that system, it's a system where individuals in each case are provided with individual radiation badges, and each of these badges at the end of the case will provide a dosimetry of the radiation exposure to each person at that case. We also looked at overall fluoroscopy time, procedural time, and contrast usage, in addition to 14-day follow-ups and any adverse outcomes that might have occurred. So the results of the chemoembolization study using the Magellan system, we had 10 patients who met the inclusion criteria. We treated a variety of stages of disease, with the vast majority being BCLC stage B liver disease. The average dose of doxorubicin was 124 milligrams, and we did 8 cases without a microcatheter, and 2 cases required a Renegade high-flow microcatheter. The average procedural time was 68 minutes. The average fluoroscopy time over all 10 cases was 23 minutes. The time elapsed from the insertion of the robotic catheter to the initiation of embolization ranged from 15 minutes to 77 minutes, partly demonstrating the learning curve that occurs from the initial case to the final cases. Additionally, we also notice the average times from access of the robotic catheter into the sheath, along with access of each vessel, and you'll notice there's also a significant difference that we noticed in the last 5 cases versus the initial cases that were performed. In terms of the final results that we had, we observed overall technical success as defined as ability to successfully deliver the drug-eluting beads at 100%. In terms of cannulating each of the vessels, 100% of the time we were able to use the robotic system to get into the SMA, the celiac, and the common hepatic artery. In 9 out of 10 cases, we were able to get into the right and left hepatic, and 8 out of 10 cases, we were able to get into the subselective arterial branches. In the 1 case and 2 cases in which it was not, we were required to use a microcatheter additionally. In terms of complications, no complications were occurred. The only issue that we had was in 1 out of 10 cases, we had a robotic system wire sensor failure requiring a reboot, and ultimately that case was successful in performing the chemoembolization. So this first case demonstrates traditional celiac axis arteriogram performed with the Magellan system. We were able to go distally into the right hepatic branch and go even much more subselectively into the distal branch feeding the tumor for delivery of the drug-eluting beads. A second case demonstrates a right hepatic arteriogram, and you'll notice a very significant tortuosity here, which we were able to easily traverse and go distally and even further distally and deliver all the chemoembolization materials again without the need for a microcatheter. You'll notice that there is a learning curve. My initial case took 3.5 hours. My second case was about an hour and a half, and then slowly over time it plateaus down until we're at the 38-minute mark from access to closure. Similarly, with fluoroscopy time, you also notice we start off at about 41.3 minutes, and if you took out this aberrant peak and valley, again, you'll notice a gradual diminishing of fluoroscopy time overall for the case with 13.7 minutes within the final few cases. So one of the questions I get is, what is the radiation exposure to a patient? And so one of the best ways I thought about comparing that was to look at a traditional manual chemoembolization case versus the data that we had accumulated from our robotic series. So I looked at the last 29 manual traditional chemoembolizations performed in my group, and the average fluoroscopy time was 22.4 minutes, with a slight difference between myself and my partner's fluoroscopy time. The average procedural time was 60 minutes for these manual cases. In comparison with the data that we collected during the series, when you get over the initial learning curve, the last 5 cases demonstrates 15.5 minutes and 57.8 minutes for fluoroscopy time and procedural time, demonstrating that there's a decrease in fluoroscopy time and the procedure time is also decreased and even or slightly the same. So when you look at radiation exposure to different participants in each case, the radiation exposure to the technologist varied over time based on where the technologist was standing in the case. But the real differences I noticed was the radiation exposure to myself as the operator, as demonstrated on this slide, where the initial case gave me about 109 millirems of radiation exposure, and slowly over time that came down all the way to about 5.2 millirems of radiation exposure within the last few cases. And when you look at it closely, we'll notice that these last 5-6 cases were all done at the independent workstation, which is me seated behind a leaded glass shield. This is traditionally where you would stand doing a traditional procedure. That would be the bedside control. When I did my initial second case, I was standing at the foot of the bed about 4 feet away from the patient, still getting decreased radiation exposure, but the real gains, as seen on the previous slide, was when I decided to free myself from this bedside area and get behind a lead shield and sit at the independent workstation. So when you compare the dosages that we get from the traditional place where you would be standing at the bedside control, you'll notice all those dosages are above 100 millirems per case. Whereas when you're using the Magellan Robotic System, they're all steadily declining to less than 10 millirems. And when you average that out where we are using the independent workstation, the average dose is 221 millirems at the bedside control versus 8.1 millirems where I was when I was behind the lead shield. Now this decrease between the bedside control and my dose as an operator translates to over 95% decreased radiation exposure. So in conclusion, the Magellan Robotic System is feasible for routine use in embolization cases. I noticed significant dose reduction to myself as the operator especially when I started getting over my initial learning curve and started using the independent workstation to manipulate the catheter. There's also dose reduction to the patient, as evidenced by reduced overall fluoroscopy time using the Magellan system. So I'd like to thank all the people who came together to put this program in place at our hospital. We got a lot of great support from the Hansen people who flew down for every case and helped us run things smoothly, and help the technologists and nurses who aren't used to doing robotic cases and are just used to a traditional manual setup.